It's not just affecting kids and teenagers. MrBeast is probably the biggest YouTube channel. His videos get tens of millions, hundreds of millions of views. MrBeast's sidekick is a guy named Chris Tyson. Sorry, was a guy named Chris Tyson. I don't say that because he's dead. I say that because he says he's no longer a guy. Chris Tyson is 26 years old, and he has just decided that he is secretly a woman. Chris Tyson has made all sorts of jokes about transvestites and transgenderism, and he's mocked the idea of it before. Now, he says, I am transgender. I am a woman. All fun and games, right? We kind of giggle at it. I pity everyone who falls into this confusion. But this is even worse because Chris Tyson is married and has a 2.5-year-old child. And he just woke up one day and told his wife, didn't tell his kid, I assume, because the kid's probably just starting to talk, but told his wife, yeah, I'm not going to be your husband anymore because I'm going to be your wife or something. I'm a woman now. Sorry, Sonny, I'm not daddy anymore. I'm mommy now, or I'm something else, but I'm not daddy, whatever that is. And he's catching a lot of flack for this online. Now, in response to that, Chris Tyson has said, informed consent, hormone replacement therapy saved my and many others' lives. The hurdle gender nonconforming people have to jump through to get life-saving, gender-affirming healthcare in a first world country is wild to me. Just let people make informed decisions about their own bodies in a first world country, as if they have these kinds of therapies in non-first world countries. They don't have a lot of these in Zambia, okay? I don't think there's a lot of hormone replacement therapy going on in Namibia, okay? But he says this is absolutely shocking. This is life-saving treatment. This is the line they always use, and this is the line that the teachers and the doctors use to guilt parents and initiate them into the transgender cult, is they'll say, well, would you rather have a dead son or a living daughter? Yeah, you got to trans your kid, you got to trans your son and chop off his genitals and put him onto all these hormones that make him look a little bit more like a girl. Because if you don't, he's going to kill himself and it's going to be your fault. It's a life-saving treatment. There is no evidence of that. There is no evidence that the transgender transition alleviates anxiety, depression, suicidality, all the. To the contrary, there is lots of evidence that the transgender transition exacerbates the sort of stresses and despair that people are feeling before they go into it. We covered those studies on the show last week. But furthermore, put that aside for a second with this guy, Chris Tyson. The problem here highlights a broader problem within liberalism, within all of modern political thought, which is we think about politics from the perspective of what we can do. It's like Jurassic Park. I know we can do this stuff, but did you ever think if you should do this kind of stuff? We think of it from the perspective of entitlements, and we call those rights. Even when they're things that are manifestly wrong, we still preposterously call those wrong things rights, which is crazy because wrongs cannot be rights. It's right there in the word rights. Regardless, it's not a good way to look at politics. A better way to look at politics, a better way to look at your own identity is not from the perspective of rights and entitlement, but from the perspective of obligation. Not what you are owed, but what you owe to other people. The reason what this guy is doing publicly is wrong is because he has an obligation to his wife to be her husband. Let's just say for a second that he could change his sex and gender. Well, he can't, but let's just say he could. There were some perfect surgery out there that changed all of his DNA, it changed all of his features. I mean, that still wouldn't change his essential identity, but again, let's just go for it. He still would have no right to do it. He took a vow to be her husband. He has a role. He has a job to do. He has a duty. And by neglecting that duty, he is committing a grave injustice against his wife. Then think about his kid. He owes it to his kid to be that kid's father. That's his role. That's his job. That's his duty. He doesn't have the right to shirk that duty. In pursuing his sexual fetish, he is denying his son what his son is owed, namely a father. That's wrong. And we all do this. We don't all go trans, but we all in modern life, we tend to shirk our duties. We say, oh, who cares about my community? Who cares about the common good? Oh, who cares about my family? Oh, who cares? And we make everything so cold and clean and clinical and individualistic. It's not just the left that does that. It's the right that does that too. And you see this reflected in no-fault divorce. You see this reflected in the weakening of the American family, even between generations. You see this in the below replacement birth rate. You see this in the the total loss of civic life and responsibility. We just forget our obligations. But we all have obligations to our duty. Now, I mentioned that this guy, just at age 26, one day decided, okay, I'm gonna become a woman. Where does this come from? We talk about how, well, maybe it's just this mental health condition called gender dysphoria. Or we say, well, maybe it's a true identity that they've been just suppressing their whole lives. Or we say, well, maybe now because it's out there in the culture, people are more open-minded to it and they consider what they previously hadn't even considered, which is a little more plausible than the biological explanation. But there's one explanation that people aren't really talking about, that I actually have to go to feminist websites, like the Feminist Current, to see anybody talking about, which is porn. Porn, according to many writers, according to many people who have looked into this, who have looked into this a lot more closely than I have, porn is playing a huge role in the surge of transgenderism. We know that porn is ubiquitous in the culture. Unless you are actively pursuing a discipline not to look at pornography, and you are a man, chances are you are looking at pornography in this culture. Porn rates among men are like over 90% or something, and the age at which young men are exposed to this is, on average, I think 11, and that's an older statistic. I think it's actually declined since then. So Feminist Current writes, why isn't anyone talking about the influence of porn on the trans trend? In recent years, trans pornography has soared in popularity. According to Pornhub's metadata, both trans and transgender porn searches have more than quadrupled in the 3 years between 2014 to 2017. And by 2018, trans was ranked the 5th highest search term of the year. Now, I was informed of this a few years ago by a reporter colleague of mine here at the Daily Wire who said, Michael, have you heard about this kind of transgender porn called hypnosis porn? And I said, nope, haven't heard about that one. Tell me about it. And she had gone on some deep dive, hadn't watched it, but had read about it. And she said, it's this kind of pornography where when people fall into it, it just totally scrambles their brain, more so than even other kinds of pornography, and it can lead to a rapid onset feeling of gender dysphoria. So I said, okay, well, I'm curious. I don't want to look up the porn for a couple of reasons. One, because that would be wrong to do, and I don't want to expose myself to that, and I don't want to then have to, then I have to miss lunch the next day so I could go to confession. It's just, and it's a busy week, so I didn't want to do that. But I did look through forums of people talking about this, and articles in places like the Feminist Current. And the way people write about this genre of porn is terrifying. I don't remember the exact quote, but there was a guy who said, I fell into this porn in my 40s. I was a totally normal guy. I fell into this genre of porn. Within something like 2 years, I couldn't get the idea of becoming a woman out of my head. It's ruined my life. Another person said that it seemed like a military-grade psychological weapon. So I thought, oh my goodness, even when I'm reading about this kind of porn, I don't want too many details because it seems like it's really, really potent. And it would probably help to explain the shocking surge in transgender identity. Unless there's just something in the water that's turning all the frickin' Zoomers trans, not the frogs gay, but the Zoomers trans, then probably there's something to do with this. If your view of sexuality is being totally transformed and that phenomenon is coinciding with everybody looking at increasingly crazy pornography, there might be a connection there. This is what one person said, according to the Feminist Current article. Quote, I started watching trans porn initially 5 or so years ago, and I remember I had post-orgasm regret. So, he finished looking at the porn, doing whatever he's going to do, and then he felt shame at that, which is a good feeling to feel when you do something like that. But he says, back then I imagined myself as the guy. About a year and a half ago, I started to imagine the possibility of being the girl in these scenarios. I wanted to be, I'll clean up a little bit of the language here. I was turned on by the submissiveness of it, he says. Then he goes on, this has led me to have some gender dysphoria, as I would love to be the woman and see where that would take me in my life as a fully transitioned trans woman. Too long didn't read. My sexual and gender identity has been completely flipped on its head because of this hypnotism type porn. All of which is to say, the White House has just declared that the COVID pandemic is over. Oh, good. That's glad. I'm sure you can all breathe a sigh of relief. I know that you were on the edge of your seats, worried, staying up at night because you were so worried about the COVID pandemic. We were told for years that COVID was the greatest public health crisis in the country. Porn is by far the biggest public health crisis in the country. And it's the one that no one's allowed to talk about. No one who objects to it is allowed to bring it up. And the ruling regime pushes it on everybody. The ruling regime defends porn broadly on free speech grounds, which porn has never been defended on free speech grounds for the whole history of our country until very recently, and the whole history of our civilization until very, very recently. It's obscene material. Obscenity is not protected by free speech laws. But they're going further. They're pushing the porn in libraries and they're pushing the porn in elementary schools. It's a very powerful tool to control people. It's a powerful tool to degrade people. When one looks at porn, one has the reaction that this guy has, looking at a very extreme and particularly degrading form of porn. But it's the same reaction. It's a kind of a shame. Elsewhere in the Feminist Current article, someone said that the very act of looking at pornography is degrading. And so this humiliating and hypnotic type of porn is a kind of meta-pornography, that it's a pornography about what it is to view pornography. And it can take you to really, really weird places. Now, I've tried to speak in vaguer terms about this. One, because mercifully I haven't seen it, so I can't really speak to the details. But two, because I don't want to pique anybody's curiosity. This is powerful, powerful stuff, according to pretty much everyone who's come into contact with it and everyone who's doing research on it. And it would seem clear to me is leading to lots of terrible effects on public health, and little kids are being exposed to it. And we're just dilly-dallying. We're doing nothing about that. We're worried about COVID. Oh no, the kid might catch a cough, which statistically won't do anything to him. What about that? If you've got something warping people's minds that has the objective of degrading people, and you degrade and humiliate a whole people, how are you supposed to have a great country? We're about to enter the membrum segmentum, the member block here, baby. The rest of the show continues now. You do not want to miss it. Become a member, use code Knowles, K-N-O-W-L-E-S, at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. dailywire.com/Knowles. See you there.